Welcome to Change Chats at NIH, a podcast series for anyone impacted by change. That's right, that means this podcast is for you. Each episode, we explore organizational change management topics through conversations with change leaders, change agents, and change practitioners. I'm your host, Bob Kim, a change management specialist in the Office of Strategic Planning and Management Operations, also known as OSMO. On today's episode, I have invited Gorka Garcia and Sandra Scarbrough to join me in a conversation about their experiences with the Optimize FOIA Initiative. But before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about Gorka and Sandra. Gorka serves as the Freedom of Information Act officer for NIH, where he oversees the policy and daily operations of the agency's FOIA program. Prior to joining NIH, Gorka served at the FDA, where his portfolio included negotiating information sharing agreements with the agency's foreign regulatory partners. Before embarking on his career in the federal government, Gorka worked as an attorney for a prestigious international law firm representing a wide variety of corporate clients before the U.S. Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Gorka holds a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry from Lehigh University, a JD from Rutgers University, and a master's degree in biotechnology from Johns Hopkins University. Sandra, known as Sandy to her friends and colleagues, holds a BA in psychology and an MA in organizational management. She has over 16 years experience in organizational change management and 12 years of experience executing change at NIH. Sandy also worked as a consultant for 2 years executing change efforts for the IRS, Department of Defense, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and of course NIH. Sandy's change implementation efforts include reorganizations, technology implementations, and process reengineering projects. Sandy recently managed and led the change effort to implement an electronic performance management program for over 2,100 Office of Management employees and supported the Optimize Freedom of Information Act initiative at NIH. In addition, she led the creation and rollout of a change management program at NIH. Sandy's focus is to educate and empower organizations to understand the value of change management and how to effectively implement their own change efforts using validated tools and techniques to meet their organization's needs. Now that I got the introductions out of the way, let's get into episode 1 of Change Chats at NIH. I started the interview by asking Gorka and Sandy to define the scope of the Optimize FOIA Initiative and the change management support the project received.
The scope of Optimize and the scope of change management's involvement in Optimize changed over time. So the scope is clear now, and what we're doing is we're harmonizing operations, FOIA operations within NIH. We are consolidating the processes, consolidating the platform that we're using for processing FOIA requests, but it wasn't always clear. And so the scope of Optimize actually changed with change management's involvement in the initiative. Originally, we were starting from scratch. We weren't really clear on what the scope was. We knew that HHS wanted us to implement some change. It looked like they wanted us to move in a certain direction. And it was really through change management's involvement and the involvement of the FOIA community and the stakeholders that we were able to appropriately define the scope of the project. Originally, we didn't know how long this was going to last. What it is people wanted out of this. So it was because of the community's involvement that we were able to better define how to improve FOIA within NIH. And that's ultimately what we're doing. We're improving FOIA at NIH.
Right. Sandy, you have anything to add in terms of what your role was on the project?
Yeah, so I have to say that my role on the project really was to help with engaging all of those individuals that Gorka mentioned. They basically, the FOIA community basically helped to co-create the entire project, it seems. From the beginning, they're the ones who identified the pain points. From the beginning, they were involved and heavily participated from the process of process mapping all the way to the actual implementation itself. So my involvement really was that of a change strategy, building out how we're going to engage individuals, when we're going to engage them, who we need to communicate to, what we need to communicate, when we need to communicate, and definitely identifying to help drive that change effort, that case for change.
Okay. So having said that, Gorka, looking back on your experience so far working with Sandy, and actually in the sort of in the interest of full disclosure, I should also say that I also was a change manager supporting the FOIA initiative as well. So
And
almost
very
seem,
effective.
yes, thank you. I don't want to seem like this is a sort of a self-serving lead-in question, but can you just describe talk about the impact that you think the change management support had on the FOIA initiative?
Well, specifically, I think that Sandy already spoke to some of these details. So, for example, we knew that we had to engage in process mapping, right? Mm-hmm. But how do we do that? So originally the thought was, all right, we'll just send out a blank slate. We'll sort of populate some of these boxes, have a workflow. We'll distribute that throughout the FOIA working group and FOIA community and get consensus over, a period of weeks. Looking back, it would have taken months, and the result wouldn't have been particularly helpful, right? So Sandy really decided that the best way to do it was just to lock everybody up in a conference room, for 2 days, 2 straight days, so we could all work out together how we envisioned our current processes and how we envisioned our future processes once everything was harmonized, right?
So I have to say, thank you for giving me that credit. That was actually your idea, Gorka, to lock everybody up.
Well, the locking part was
Yes.
definitely my idea. But how to engage people strategically is really specifically what Sandy brings to the table, right? Because you can just keep sending information to people, right? But it's defining that ask and defining when to ask these people, right? For information, for input, that really, I think, has made this a success so far. And we're still moving through the motions here, but it's that thoughtful implementation of change management, of the outreach, that has really made a difference. In more general terms, the impact that change management has had it speaks more to, I'm in a very specific place, within change management in this process. But my sense is that we've gained the trust of the community, to a great extent, and the trust of the leadership here at NIH. And so that's really the broader impact of change management is this relationship of openness and trust. There's a great degree of transparency. And the thing is that I can go and talk to the community and assume, okay, they've heard me, we're done. But because of the change management picture, it was made clear to me that you have to reach out often and very clearly, and to look things from people's other perspectives, and even then you'll reach out to the community, say something, and on the 5th time somebody will come up and say, well, you've never said that to us before, that was really helpful. And you're thinking, well, you said this before, but it just takes a while for people to really understand where you're coming from. You're working on this day in, day out, they're not. So gaining that trust and providing that transparency and that consistency of message really went a long way to make this a successful effort.
Right. Well, it almost sounds like you're describing Sandy, or the change management sort of methodology, or the change management resources, as sort of serving as almost a relationship broker to some extent, even though you've actually had relationship established already with your own FOIA community and leadership and sponsors and so on and so forth. But to develop that sort of communication strategy to gain some trust and confidence, that seemed to be what sort of the change management added to that project.
Well, see, so you're hitting on something that's key here, because the reality is the people that are entrusted with the changes, with the implementation of the changes, are the managers, the supervisors. And so we have experience in supervising people, right? And so that may lead us to believe that we have experience in changing, right? How we operate within the office, our responsibilities, etc., and we don't have that, right? So I think at the outset I thought I had all the tools that I needed because I am an experienced supervisor, but really I realized I wasn't experienced in implementing change, right? And so it was Sandy's questions right at the outset that really framed the fact that there was a lot of room for improvement, and that there was a certain direction that we had to follow to make this a successful effort.
Got it. So speaking of your experiences with change management, what was your understanding of change management as a professional discipline?
I'll tell you, my experience with change management was mixed when I was at my old agency, right? So I'd actually been in an office where I was transitioning from being a staff member to a member of management. So I actually got to hear the message that the change manager was delivering to both the staff and management, and they were internally inconsistent. In fact, I felt like they were basically putting both the staff and management at odds with one another. So my experience was actually mixed. So I'd seen things go wrong, but I also knew that it was really important to manage these kinds of transitions, right? So when the offer was extended to provide somebody from change management to help with this particular effort, I was hopeful, but I didn't know what to expect. And some of my colleagues' experience, and they indicated that they were really unclear about the benefits outright. And so I was a little bit guarded, but Sandy knew how to ask the right questions. Where I knew that our philosophies coincided, and that there was a lot to be gained from engaging the stakeholders early on, right? So my understanding was maybe mixed at the beginning, and it was only after engaging with the change manager that I understood what it was they brought to the table, at least at the outset. Now I know even more about change management. It's really strange because I think I misheard change management at the beginning. I thought that change management had to do with managing change, and after working with Sandy, I feel like basically what change management means is changing managers. So there's this double meaning, and you really, what's nice about the way Sandy approached it is she didn't really force anything on me. She just provided tools, provided her experience, her expertise, her curiosity, and really I think she went beyond change management. I mean, basically she became professionally invested in the success of the project.
So Sandy, after hearing from Gorka, I want to know if you could describe to our listeners some of the change management activities that you facilitated from the moment that you first initially began to work with Gorka on the FOIA initiative.
So as a change manager, I usually try to, even before I get involved in a project, do my research. So the first thing that I did was a stakeholder analysis. And the way I did that was, okay, who's being impacted by this? I identified those individuals. Then I actually did a research. I went online to the NIH FOIA sites, all of them, and just started to pick out, there are these people called FOIA liaisons. Oh, these are FOIA coordinators. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I started to then list all of the different, all the different players, all the different people that are going to be impacted. Notice that they have requesters. Okay, what's that? So I just built out the change management stakeholder analysis based on that initially. So when I did start to work with Gorka and the rest of the individuals, I already had an idea of, in a sense, of who those change management stakeholders were. Then I went ahead and I did some interviews. I asked permission from the sponsors, from Gorka, if I could interview some individuals in the community. And after those interviews, I then pulled information together to identify, any areas where there are concerns and what people were thinking the benefits were, and what did they think that how was this going to impact them, and how was it going to impact their daily jobs. So the first thing, of course, was that stakeholder analysis. Based on that stakeholder analysis led me to I leveraged it to help me with all the communications, with supporting Gorka's ability to be a good sponsor, to communicate effectively to individuals with the key messages. It also helped to drive, identifying who we're going to be training, because there's training involved in this. And that stakeholder analysis also helped with workforce impacts. So that one document, and it's a huge spreadsheet, you use that, you leverage it throughout the entire project, and it will continuously help you throughout the project. One of my goals was to understand what Gorka's thoughts were. It's really good to have a good understanding of what is he trying to communicate. I also got the sense that he's empathetic, and he's high EQ, I would say, which is really good for any sponsor. In fact, I have to say Gorka is one of the best sponsors I've ever worked with, because he understands that relationships are very important, and he makes sure that he is listening to those individuals that are involved in the project, and really thoughtful, and takes into all of their concerns and all their feedback. He takes it very seriously, and and these individuals, I can tell they see it and they believe it, and that's where that trust comes in. And if you have a sponsor that is trustworthy, that is empathetic, it's just, for me, when I see that, it's a ticket to success, a successful implementation.
Right. So let me unpack this a little bit, because you threw a lot of change management lingo out there.
I do that.
You did stakeholder analysis, and that led to engagement or communication planning, engagement, workforce impacts, training. So when she came to you, Gorka, with all of this, I'm sure she explained it to you in a way that you would understand. But what were your first impressions of all of this? I mean, there's a lot going on there, right?
I was intimidated. I mean, I didn't know what the scope was. Basically, everything was on the table in terms of the FOIA program. They could restructure it from scratch. They might not even seek my input in terms of restructuring the program. So it was very intimidating, because you have somebody that's coming in, they have the best of intentions, but they're not going to be affected. I mean, once the implementation is over of this change, they're gone, and you have to live with the consequences. So you really have to trust these people when they're walking through the door. And so one of the things that struck me about Sandy is, and what you heard just now, is this curiosity. She was not going through the motions. She was not sending me a spreadsheet and saying, okay, fill in all the participants in the FOIA community. Who else can you think about? She was actually identifying people that I wouldn't have thought about, and identifying them as stakeholders. And that in itself is also, in a minor way, terrifying, because now you're giving voices to these people that you don't necessarily know, and you don't know what their perspectives are going to be, and yet now they have a seat at the table, and they're going to influence your program, and they too may walk away, at the end of the day, and you're left with whatever changes we've made, but so it was that curiosity that Sandy had, that she made herself an expert in the program, basically, and she explored as many resources as she had available, and then some. She took the time to reach out to the community members and get their input, get their perspectives, because people they may not necessarily come to me to tell me what they're thinking, but they may go to somebody else, like somebody in Sandy's position, to express their concerns or their preferences.
Right.
So that's what made the process much less intimidating to me, because I felt like I had a partner that cared about the outcome, because of that curiosity. That level of investment led me to believe that this was somebody I could trust.
Right. Well, I was going to ask you how, because you mentioned that you were sort of intimidated at first, and I was going to ask you how you overcame that. But it sounds like the way you overcame it is having Sandy's curiosity, and she sort of absorbed a lot of that work on your behalf and on behalf of the project.
She did.
But also that your trust and confidence in her abilities, and for as a result of her curiosity, that she developed this sort of expertise around the FOIA business and your staff, is also what helped you kind of ease some of that intimidation.
And by taking on a lot of the change management work and also the non-change management work, right? She helped to create a bit of a lattice around which we could define the problem a little bit more effectively. Because when she came in, we didn't quite know what we wanted to do, right? And so by creating, by identifying all the stakeholders, and creating opportunities for people to provide feedback, all of a sudden there were all these avenues to provide a bit of structure to the problem, and maybe lead us to a solution. So it was that combination of, value added. She wasn't just doing the change management part. She was really a partner in moving this forward, creating the opportunities to bring people together to look for a solution, and really ultimately I just trusted her judgment, But to do that, you have to get to know somebody, right? So it takes time.
Right,
it's
of course.
Process.
Yeah, and it did take time. And I did try to not use so much change management lingo. In the very beginning, I didn't call it a stakeholder analysis. I called it people mapping. I was like, we got to map your people. We got to map out the people that are going to be impacted by your project. So that's one of the things that we did first is I tried to, use layman's terms. And when I talked about workforce impacts, I said, well, if you change this process, or if you go from a paper process to an electronic process, how is that going to impact Joe Schmo's work, daily work? And we want to think through that process. So I kind of try to explain it in that way.
So this may be a little hard to do, Gorka, but I'm wondering if you look back, the last several months of the FOIA initiative and Sandy's involvement, or the change management resources, if you didn't have those resources, how do you think that the project would have ended up today?
So would we be in the same place? Absolutely not. So what change management, and specifically Sandy, brought to bear in the project is how to leverage that network in a sense. So you have tools, but when do you bring in each of these groups of people, this expertise, to make the most out of a situation, right? And of course, Sandy was also working very close to leadership, so she had that insight. She knew what communications were sort of going back and forth, amongst leadership, and so it helped to define the problem a little bit better, because at that point we were having weekly meetings, but not necessarily getting very much insight. So Sandy was able to carry our water to leadership and back, between those weekly meetings. Where would we be? We'd still be, in the middle of trying to implement a platform that we weren't quite sure how it was going to fit into our processes. I mean, we've actually made an incredible amount of progress. It's been a year, and in that 1 year, we've gone from not knowing what we were going to do and how the FOIA program was going to look to having a very good idea about what we wanted, having implemented the portal, the platform, the portal is well on its way, and importantly, having managed a lot of the anxiety within the community to make that process smooth, because I don't think we would have had an easy time out of transitioning if people were nervous, but because people were so involved throughout the process, thanks to Sandy, we were able to just bring everybody along, and it wasn't me leading the way, it was everybody moving as a group, right? So for instance, we have bi-weekly working group meetings. So twice a week I meet with the leaders of the FOIA community throughout NIH, and we come to a consensus about certain issues together, right? So it's led to success because we know how much time it takes to truly invest in change management as a community, right? I feel like I might have tried to do certain things by myself, and sometimes that works. But when you're trying to transition, you really need everybody's input. Right.
Well, this is a nice segue into my next question then, is about sort of lessons learned, right? Kind of looking back from the past to learn for the future. So as you look towards the next sort of phase of the FOIA initiative, what are some of the key takeaways or lessons learned or sort of valuable impacts do you feel like that change management had that was sort of an aha moment for you, that you thought, wow, that really did make a big impact on the success of the project?
So looking back, the easy answer is engage change management early. That's the key lesson here. It was only because and I feel like we almost did it a bit too late, but because we engaged with Sandy early on, we were able to get all the stakeholders' inputs early. So you can either get everybody engaged and get their perspectives early on, or you can deliver a finished product and be sure that everybody's going to be upset. They haven't had a say in the outcome, and maybe it's the outcome that they would have wanted. But you don't necessarily want to take away that agency from people when it affects their day-to-day lives.
Well, you heard it here first. Gorka says engage change management early. I want to thank Gorka and Sandy for their insightful comments on the Optimize FOIA Initiative and the impacts change management had on that project. That's it for today's episode of Change Chats. Thanks for listening, and if you have questions or comments about the topic in this episode or general feedback about the podcast series, share it on the Change Management Community Practice Yammer Group. What's that you say? You don't know about the Change Management Community Practice Yammer Group? Well, then you can email the Osmo Change Management team at NIH changemanagement@od.nih.gov. Again, that's NIH changemanagement@od.nih.gov, and they'll set you all up. Change Chats is produced by the Office of Strategic Planning and Management Operations. Bye!